Welcome to Trench Diaries. This is Iron Coffins part 26. At 9:05 p.m, Riedel sent a radio message to High Command reporting our hopeless situation, describing the enormous anti-aircraft defense in the middle of the Atlantic and the two convoys that had escaped the first attack without us being able to fire a single shot. In the evening of May the 15th, at the end of the 4-day battle, it was confirmed to us that U-456 was indeed lost and 3 more boats had followed it to the ocean floor. U-266, U-89 and U-753 had not responded to the repeated requests from High Command to report their location. The result of the battle was staggering. 6 submarines were sunk and the 7th was heavily damaged and rendered combat ineffective. It was a disaster of the greatest magnitude and the second defeat in May. The Allied naval counteroffensive had struck us with surprising strength and precision. U-230 limped through the Atlantic, unable to react quickly. The course was east, and fortunately we did not spot any aircraft for the next 2 days. However, the tranquility was interrupted by a long series of desperate distress signals broadcast by our boats in distress. Decrypting death messages became a routine part of our onboard activities. The reports piled up on the commander's small table, and every time I read a new distress call, it hit me like a hammer blow, and I half expected to read a similar message from U-230, which would sound something like this. Attacked by aircraft, boat sinking. Attacked by destroyer, diving inoperable, abandoning boat. Destroyer, aircraft, bombed, unable to dive. Attacked by aircraft, boat sinking. We never heard from those boats again. The thought of our own destruction haunted us daily, hourly even, the more death calls we intercepted. It couldn't be much longer before the hunters would catch us in our lame diving tube and bring death to our own iron coffin. May 16. At dawn, we were instructed by U-634 in square BE-81 to take on fuel on May the 17th. May the 17th, U-230 cruised for hours at the specified rendezvous point with the U-634. At 1:15 p.m, we had already doubted the existence of U-634, the boat was spotted in the distance. 40 minutes later, we came alongside our supplier. It was a strange reunion. I recognized in the commander of U-634, Oberleutnant Dahlhaus, a friend from my minesweeper days in Holland, and, in the XO of the boat, my crewmate Bosch from Stuttgart. We exchanged greetings and immediately began laying firefighting hoses from boat to boat. While steaming on parallel courses against the sea and wind, the pumps transported 15 tons of diesel oil into our empty tanks. The fuel transfer took about 2 hours, and for 2 hours we nervously and tensely scanned the grey sky for planes, ready at every second to cut the hoses and dive away, or engage in an uneven fight with the never-functioning anti-aircraft weapons. But no aircraft appeared. Relieved, we completed the transfer, separated from U-634, and both boats continued their march to Brest. May the 19th. U-230 crossed the 15th longitude west, the gateway to the Bay of Biscay, the gateway to Purgatory. At 10:40 a.m, we surfaced right in front of a 4-engine flying boat, a Sunderland. The radar warning receiver had no detection at all. The Sunderland flew a visual approach and dropped 4 bombs. This attack marked the beginning of an indescribable 5-day chase. Under the cover of darkness, U-230 crept over the water. Maximum speed, 12 ridiculous knots. 7 times we dived before screaming detections and shook off 28 well-placed bombs. At sunrise, we were almost beaten, nearly deaf, and our batteries were only 3/4 charged. We disappeared into the depths for the rest of the day. On this day, the English destroyed 2 of our boats. U-954 and U-273 were bombed and sunk almost simultaneously. Their fate was the same, only the location of their demise was different. May the 20th. The British had apparently realized that 2 boats were heading east towards the coast. Countless bombers, including 4-engined land machines, pursued us. During the night that followed, we dived 9 times and survived 36 murderous bomb drops. May the 21st. 3 hours after dawn, we drifted into the most dangerous area of anti-submarine hunting groups. Creeping at a depth of only 40 meters, we managed to slip past the endless fields of Aztec impulses. 1 hour before midnight, we surfaced, eager for air and power and fully aware that the coming night could be our last. First attack. Diving. 4 wild detonations shook the boat. Suddenly, a jet of fire in the rear part of the control room. Sparks shot across the room. Thick smoke immediately enveloped us. The control room was ablaze. Bringing the boat to the surface seemed impossible. The specter of suffocation loomed threateningly before us. Bulkheads were slammed shut, compartments sealed. Some men fought the flames with fire extinguishers, and U-230 suddenly became stern-heavy and shot back to the surface where only seconds before the enemy machine had dropped its calling card. Thick smoke took our breath away. I pressed a handkerchief to my face and followed the commander into the tower. Fire leapt from wall to wall. Then the boat leveled off. It had surfaced. We rushed to the bridge. Someone threw ammunition onto the platform. The portside diesel began to sputter, and red clouds of smoke escaped the tower hatch. We sailed like a blazing torch through the darkest night, when finally the men below in the control room managed to extinguish the flames. That same night, we survived 7 air attacks and maneuvered away from 28 bombs. May the 22nd. It was the 4th day of our hunt for life, our race to port. We drifted at 40 meters and listened to a depth charge pursuit somewhere in the west. It lasted the entire day. At 10:30 p.m. we surfaced. The night was black and opaque. No detection for over an hour by the radar warning receiver. The circulating fans sucked the night air into the boat when suddenly a gigantic spotlight hung in the dark firmament. It grew at a mad speed, then its long white beam engulfed our bridge, flooding the boat with glaring daylight and blinding us. A 4-engine plane, a Liberator, dove down on us, firing from all guns. A quick rudder command, and the boat swung sluggishly toward the approaching cone of light. Then, the giant bird roared over our bridge like a prehistoric monster, showering us with hot exhaust gases and catapulting into the night. 4 bombs exploded. My legs were pounded into my body with each blast, and then 4 giant geysers collapsed. "Boat is rigged to dive," came the call from below. The alarm bell shrilled, and U-230 immediately plunged into the protective depth. As it slid down to 60 meters, Siegmann stormed into the radio room to give a lesson to the seamen who had not warned us. "What the hell is wrong with you, Kästner? Were you asleep? You almost killed us all!" "Oberleutnant, there was no detection," protested the seaman. "And our equipment is in perfect order." "Don't give me any nonsense, Kästner," raged Siegmann angrily. "The entire crew is in your hands, man. If you fail again, your skin isn't worth a dime." May the 23rd. Shortly after midnight, we surfaced. We had little fresh air in the boat and even less power in the batteries. Tension was at its peak. I expected that we wouldn't escape a second time if the approach was repeated. But for long minutes, only the howl of our portside diesel and the groan of the intake air were the only sounds we heard. After a reprieve of about an hour, our time was up. A beam of light suddenly illuminated the bridge. The sharp beam came from starboard ahead towards us. Everything happened too fast. No time to shoot, and like a ghost, the Liberator came at us. Small flames leaked from its machine guns. The projectiles whizzed around our heads. The flyover was lightning fast. Hot exhaust gases hit the bridge, and then total darkness. 4 bombs crashed along our outboard bunkers. 4 geysers rose into the night air, and the boat was thrown to the side, breaking free from the vortex of foam and spray, still rigged for dive. We immediately submerged. As I faced the commander in his niche, he unbuttoned his salt-encrusted leather jacket and said, shaking his head, "I must admit, XO, there was indeed no detection, not this time either. Our METOX seems to be in order. It appears the English must have applied a new detection trick. I have no other explanation for these mysterious approaches." We were completely surprised and shaken. First, the aircraft carriers in the convoy, now this new trick of the bombers, allowing them to locate us without revealing their position. There was no reason to risk our lives senselessly, so we had to reverse our tactic and sail on the surface during the day when we could see our opponents with the naked eye. It seemed more favorable to risk a duel during the day than to be blown to pieces by bombs at night. At 7:20 a.m. we surfaced. Our prospects of making the last leap of 170 miles to the port of Brest were not very promising. Flooded and ready to dive immediately, we headed for the coast. We spotted 4 Sunderlands and 5 Liberators. 9 times we surfaced again, risking a new eastward push. We reached the continental shelf that same afternoon. At nightfall, we informed High Command that we would be at the rendezvous point at 8 a.m. the following morning. On May the 24th at 12:20 p.m., U-230 slipped into the inner harbor basin of Brest. The stern deck half submerged, the superstructure riddled and damaged, the boat conveyed to everyone on the pier an impression of what it had been through. The marching band that usually played a march wasn't there. Only the girls with their bouquets reminded us of the glorious past. The commander of the 9th U-boat flotilla and his entourage showed clear signs of dismay. We were quickly and unceremoniously transported to the base. However, when we had taken our seats at the white-covered tables in the reception hall after the celebration, the landlubbers tried to make our return as pleasant as possible. After the celebration, I returned to my room, which I had left 5 weeks earlier. My suitcases had already been delivered from the cargo. When I finished the envelope with my will from my pigskin suitcase, I felt gratitude welling up in me. I had escaped once again. In my mail, I found only 2 letters from Marianne. A lot of strange thoughts crowded my mind, but a small package from home distracted me. Mother had baked me a birthday cake. It was already 4 weeks old, hard, and crumbled into many crumbs, but to honor Mother's belief in my luck, I ate the hard cake. The strenuous routine of the first 2 days in port, emptying the boat and moving it to the dock, initially kept me from thinking about our misfortune. But on the 3rd morning, I was reminded of our failed mission when I met the commander of U-634 on the pier in front of his boat, which had also returned the night before our return. I thanked Dahlhaus for his help with a hearty handshake. And despite everything, I managed to suppress the thoughts of death. With my friends, those who had also managed to return, I went to the casino bar. We celebrated our resurrection with the beauties of Madame and danced with a cheerfulness that only the survivors of a battle can muster. Madame had replenished her supply of exotic flowers. She was always very charming and resisted my occasional advances with gentle determination. Not one of us left the casino bar that night. Each hour with Janine, each night, could be the last. Indeed, the submarine war was slowly turning into a long funeral procession. The Allied counteroffensive had struck with unexpected force. The English and Americans had quietly equipped their high seas fleet with fast corvettes, put a large number of small aircraft carriers, converted merchant ships at that, into service, stationed many smaller planes on these pocket carriers, and massed a fleet of long-range bombers at strategically located airfields around the Atlantic. Then they had struck unexpectedly and hit the mark in 38 cases. That was the bitter result. No less than 38 boats were sunk in that fateful month of May 1943. Many of my comrades had found death on those boats, and it was clear to me that our proud submarines would turn into a colossal heap of iron coffins if our leadership did not immediately take effective countermeasures. The shipyard engineers calculated the overhaul time for our boat to be at least 4 weeks. Since I was entitled to a longer leave this time, I planned to spend a day in Paris, make a short visit to my parents, and the rest a full week with Marianne in the hot summer sun at Wannsee. One evening in June, I handed over my duties to Heinz Riedel and left Brest on the night express to Paris. As the train raced through the French countryside, I believed I heard familiar sounds. The pounding of the diesels, death charge explosions, detonations of bombs and torpedoes, the breaking of ships, and the wild howling of the storm. But it was only the click of the railway wheels that kept me from falling asleep. I arrived at Gare Montparnasse when the morning was still fresh and young. A taxi took me to my hotel near Place Vendôme, reserved for naval officers. I had decided to remain free and independent during my short visit. But the abundance of friendly ladies made it difficult for me to stick to my resolution. I hurried into the cool halls of the Louvre and spent most of the day wandering through the galleries d'Apollon, the Grand Galerie, and the Salle des Caryatides, where, as the story went, the Huguenots had been hanged from the ceiling beams. At sunset, I went to an expensive restaurant near the opera and indulged in a feast all by myself. Then I strolled along the Boulevard des Capucines, politely declined some solicitations of paid affection, and retreated to the comfortable silence of my hotel room. The next day, time stood still for me. In the morning chill, I went to Place Pigalle, had breakfast at a small street cafe, then climbed the broad marble stairs to the Sacré-Cœur and spent the afternoon and evening on the streets and in the cafes of the Latin Quarter. At 10 p.m., I boarded the express train to Germany. The morning sun was already high in the sky when my train pulled into Frankfurt main station. I immediately noticed that the giant glass dome spanning the tracks was heavily damaged. The glass had fallen out of the framework, only the bare steel skeleton remained. The sight was a gloomy prelude to my visit. As always, I arrived unannounced at my parents' home. My mother heard the doorbell, opened the glass door, and stared at me as if I were a stranger. After a moment of consideration, I said with slight bewilderment, "Good day, Mother. Let me in already. I'm still alive. It's good to be back." I noticed that my mother was strangely nervous. She had lost considerable weight. I thought I detected a trace of sorrow in her face, but instead of bothering her with questions, I said, "I am truly glad that I can put my feet under your table again." Like all mothers, she asked me if I had enough to eat. She claimed I had become very thin and wanted to know about my health. "Do you have enough clothes to keep warm? You can't know, but I have to tell you, we've given away your things and the laundry for our soldiers on the Eastern Front. We've also given away your shoes and even the skiing equipment. But tell me, what about the U-boat war in the Atlantic? We don't hear much about our U-boats anymore." I interjected that she would soon hear about our successes again, but quickly changed the subject. I had decided not to talk about our current setbacks and asked, "How are you all? How's Trudel? Has she seen her Hans again since the wedding?" "Oh, Trudel is doing well," she said. "Hans was here at Easter. His parents also visited us. They had some very serious air raids in Düsseldorf and had left the city to wait in the Black Forest until conditions improved. We recently experienced some heavy air attacks too. You've probably heard about them, but they were not as devastating as in other cities like Berlin and Hamburg, for example." Then I asked, "And how's father?" At that moment, Mother suddenly burst into tears. Sobbing, she reported that they had taken father away. The Gestapo had arrested him about 3 months ago. Mother wept. He was in investigative custody in the Gestapo prison in die Hamelsgasse. "I didn't write you about it. I didn't want to make life at the front even harder for you than it already is." Torn between disbelief and rising anger, I pressed Mother to find out what had actually happened. As it turned out, father had maintained a friendship with a young woman that was more than just superficial. She had worked in his company and had long been listed as a secretary in his books. One day in spring, he had asked Mother for a divorce to marry the girl. But, of course, that wasn't the reason for his arrest. Fate had it that the young woman had a Jewish past. Father had committed a dangerous crime by shielding her from the Gestapo. Unfortunately, someone had found out that the girl was Jewish, and so the Gestapo arrested them both. The young woman was deported to a concentration camp, and father was thrown into prison. I was horrified by father's arrest, but the injustice of the entire process did not surprise me. Father had suffered under the government's measures before. In the winter of 1935, his business, a furniture savings association, was closed due to a government regulation along with 36 similar companies. Simply because such societies no longer conformed to the views of our new leaders of the Third Reich, father was deprived of his life's work and without prior warning, explanation or recourse. And so, at the age of 46, he had to start anew. Thanks to his inventiveness and diligence, he had managed to build a new business and provide for his family. Soon after this incident, the ideological madness of our government had even worse consequences. I myself had experienced Kristallnacht in the fall of 1938, when the mob rampaged through the streets of Frankfurt, smashing shop windows and looting Jewish businesses, while the police stood by and did nothing. The mob threw furniture out of the windows of Jewish apartments, tipped pianos over balcony railings, and hurled porcelain, books, lamps, and household items onto the streets. And after everything valuable was stolen, the remaining items were piled into a heap and set on fire. I remembered how father led me through the burning rubble in the Zoo district to help a Jewish business friend, and how he found his apartment plundered. That day, I saw my father with moist eyes for the first time. For us, the Kristallnacht was shameful and tragic, but my father was not a rebel or agitator, nor was he a partisan of a hopeless cause, and neither was I. Of course, I knew that not everything was in perfect order, but the war surprised me when I was 19, and I had neither the time nor the political interest to think about it. Now, however, I was inexorably involved in a matter that deeply outraged me. I had to resolve the issue, even if it cost me my position or destroyed my military career. I went to the Gestapo headquarters in Lindenstraße. It was only a short distance from our apartment, and my uniform and decorations allowed me to pass the guard without hindrance. In the reception hall, a secretary behind a black oak table asked if she could help me. "Ich möchte Obersturmbannführer von Molitor sprechen, bitte." "I would like to speak to Obersturmbannführer von Molitor, please." I put on my most winning smile, handed her my business card and added, Es wird für Herrn von Molitor eine Überraschung sein. It will be a surprise for Mr. von Molitor. I assumed that he rarely saw a submariner, especially not one whose father was behind bars. I had just enough time to devise an attack plan when the girl led me into a well-appointed room and introduced me to the top SS officer of the city. So, this was one of the dreaded SS men whose word could decide a person's fate. The middle-aged officer, in his light grey SS uniform, resembled more a genial businessman than a cold-blooded executioner. Von Molitor's greeting was as peaceful as his appearance. It's a pleasure to be able to greet someone from the Navy for a change. I see you serve in the U-boat force. Probably a very exciting and interesting thing, isn't it? Well, what can I do for you, Lieutenant? I replied in a serious tone. Obersturmanführer, Sie haben meinen Vater verhaften lassen. Ich glaube nicht, dass ein triftiger Grund dafür vorliegt und ich erwarte, dass Sie ihn sofort freilassen. You have arrested my father. I do not believe there is a valid reason for it, and I expect you to release him immediately. The expression on his fleshy face changed from a friendly smile to total surprise. He looked at my business card, repeatedly read my name, and then stammered, I'm sorry, Lieutenant. Someone must have made a mistake. I will investigate the matter immediately. He wrote something on a piece of paper and pressed a button. A bright blonde secretary came in and took the note from his hand. You must know, Lieutenant, I am not informed about every individual case, but, of course, I know that you wouldn't be here if your father were not in custody. Das ist richtig, und ich halte den Grund für seine Verhaftung für völlig... That is correct, and I consider the reason for his arrest to be completely... Before I could make a dangerous mistake, the girl returned and handed von Molitor another note. He took the time to read it carefully and then said, in a conciliatory tone, Lieutenant, I now remember the case. You can have your father back this evening. I am convinced that 3 months of solitary confinement have taught him a lesson. I regret the incident, but it was solely your father's fault. I am glad I could do you a favor. I assume you will now be able to spend your leave in a pleasant manner, Lieutenant. Heil Hitler. I quickly stood up and thanked him briefly, not because he had done me a favor, but because he could hardly refuse my demand. I left him with a challenging military salute. As I was back on the street, I also thought of the young woman who had probably disappeared into a camp forever. I regretted not being able to help her. Long after the end of the war, I learned that she had survived the war and the camp as well. Without detour, I went to father's business to see my sister for the first time after her wedding. When I told her that father would be home for dinner, she burst into tears. She cried and said, We have repeatedly tried in vain to get father released, but the Gestapo did not respond to our appeals. I am so glad you have come back. Our parents' marriage is over, and since father has been in Hamelsgasse, I have been running the business alone. I let Trudel know how proud I was of her and suggested closing the business for the rest of the day to properly celebrate my success. She gave instructions to the forewoman and both of us went the short way home. It was almost dinner time when a key turned in the glass door and father, unaware of my presence, entered the vestibule. When he saw me, it was clear to him that I was responsible for his release. Silently, we shook hands. Time for the after-action report. Herbert's father literally dodged a bullet by having such a determined son, because a lot of people actually died in that prison. But we will talk about that later. First, once more, Herbert made it back to land. At the end of this patrol, he survived dozens of air attacks and close to 100 depth charges. He also made first contact with the so-called Leigh light, a searchlight used exclusively for anti-submarine warfare. The Leigh light was named after its inventor, and it was mounted in a controllable nacelle or turret and was able to project a very bright beam of light onto the seas to make targeting U-boats easier. How bright was it? Well, the nacelle type used on Catalinas and Liberators had a maximum intensity of 90 million candelas, which is about 400 times brighter than the high beams of a standard car. It was really bright. As such, it gave the added benefit of blinding the U-boat crews, thus making a counterattack via anti-aircraft fire impossible. Also, by this time, the Metox receiver was completely useless and the improved Naxos device would only be introduced about 5 months later. Until then, the U-boats suffered catastrophic casualties. On the bright side, Werner is back home again, and it is refreshing to read about how mothers haven't changed at all during the times. My mother asked me the very same question about my weight many times, even when I was a 30-year-old man. Speaking about men, Werner has his first encounter with the oppressive side of the regime thanks to the Gestapo, the German secret police. I find it really interesting to hear his thoughts, especially when we compare him to Burkhard aboard Bismarck, who constantly rages against the system as well as Hitler and knew very early what was going to happen. Werner here only wanted to become an officer in the Navy. But now, fate showed its hand and he had to use his status to get his father out of prison. This was a ballsy move because he confronted a high-ranking SS officer. An Obersturmbannführer is the equivalent of a lieutenant colonel, and as such, he is factually quite outranked as a meager second lieutenant. Thankfully, his demeanor helped save the day and his father got out. Now, depending on the mood of a Gestapo officer, this could have very well put him on a list, but thankfully, nothing ever came of it. I tried to find out some more info about this Mr. von Molitor, but there are no files that I could find. But given his status, it was probably an assumed name. Anyway, time for a family reunion, and we will learn more about that in the next episode. Now, if you've made it this far, first of all, thank you again. Second of all, you can now become a channel member and receive neat benefits such as badges, custom emojis, exclusive videos, and more. All of it starting at $1.99 per month. Consider checking it out to support the channel. Until then, stay safe, bye bye, cheers.